Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 3. We'll present our presentation. It's talk about the world of American modernism. Before we start our presentation, I would like to introduce our group first. The first is Andi Fadel Anugrah, Husnul Hatimah, Suryatni Irna Mahnasari, Miralda Paramestika, and the last is Shafira Alfira. And the first speakers will be explained by me. Okay. Modernism is an artistic movement that began in Europe, eventually reaching the United States during a time of change, confusion, discovery, invention, and war. From 1914 and 1945, modernism in American literature reflected the unease of this grappling with a changed post-war world. Modernism is a technique, thought, discussion, creative work, or genre of art and literature that breaks from the classical mold and that is considered cutting edge. An example of modernism is a technique in art that breaks from classical stylings. And the next is will be presented by Suryatni Irna Mahnasari.
Okay, thank you. And I'm second speaker. I want to present about American novel and the Great War. The first one is Paul Fossel's novel. Paul Fussell has written about for English writers. The First World War operated as a kind of apocalyptic genre, with the period before August 1914 appearing in the legend as a timeless Edwardian ideal, and the time after a regrettable collapse into 20th century modernity. Second is John Dos Passos' novel 1919. Most American soldiers in 1917 were involved in peripheral military activities training, driving ambulance and so on, rather than being part of the front line, so that the comment of Fred Summers in John Dos Passos' novel 1919 about how this ain't a war, it's a goddamn cook store would have a particular relevance to the situation of American servicemen in Europe. Next is The Enormous Room. The Enormous Room was published some years after its author's wartime experience. When he had been interned along with his friend William Slater Brown in the French military camp at Le Fertamage, a detention center for undescribable persons and suspected spies. The next material was presented by Miralda Paramestika.
Okay, now is In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway. In Our Time is the piece of writing that made by Ernest Hemingway. He published these collections of short stories for the first time in 1925. In Our Time, like all of Hemingway's writing, use simple, declarative sentences with little or no descriptions of emotions. Next is A Farewell to Arms, is a laconic knowingness of characters in the modern world and surprised by the violent events that surround them. At the same time, the balladness that is endemic to Hemingway's war writing implies how elements of parody are inherent within Hemingway's literary project. Last but not least is The Early Novels by William Faulkner. The early novels of William Faulkner testify in interesting ways to the manner in which the shadow of the First World War hovers over the literatures of the 1920s. Although the United States itself was never a theater of conflict and didn't have to endure mass bombing, the trauma suffered by servicemen and behalf the country as a whole helped to shape the directions of the American novel throughout the 1920s. The next material will be continued by Husnul Hatimah.
Okay, I'm the next speakers, and I would like to explain about aesthetics of contradiction. First point is this merging of customer and high fashion of modernist culture leads to a radical transformation of the meaning of modernism. Why? Because first, it implied that a movement based on the rejection of tradition had become a tradition of its own. And the second is, it demonstrated that the distinction between elite modernist and mass consumerist culture had lost its precious. The next point is modernism flourished mainly in consumer or capitalist societies, despite the fact that its proponents often rejected consumerism itself. However, high modernism began to merge with consumer culture after World War II, especially during the 1990s. The next contradiction is modernism had become so institutionalist that it was now first avant-garde, indicating that it had lost its power as revolution movement. And the last contradiction is some traditional artists like Alexander Stoddard reject modernism generally as the product of an approach of false money lay with false culture. That's all for me. And the next slide will explain with my friend Sharifa.
Okay, I'm the last speaker. I'll explain about studies and world literature, The Great Gatsby and the Grapes of Wrath. In the point 1, The Great Gatsby by Scott Fitzgerald as a typically American text of the 1920s, and The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck as a typical text of the 1930s. On the second point, we can see what happened in America that year. Both of these decades are portrayed in classic American novels. Both authors present the pursuit of the American dream as a major theme. However, this is done quite differently. In The Great Gatsby, Tom and Daisy are focused on the outcome of the dream to be proposed, secure, and achieve social status. They believe that their achievement and success at pursuing the dream is displayed purely by their wealth and materialistic possessions. And in The Grapes of Wrath, the Judge and the Outcasts are also trying to achieve the American dream by being hardworking, honest, and showing integrity. They are focused on the path of the dream rather than the material possessions and wealth. That's all for me. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. That's all our presentation. Thank you very much for watching this video. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. YouTuber sekali, thank you very much.